Claire Williams, everyone. What an amazing honour to have you here today.
Thank you.
Claire, what have you thought of the whole experience? Because you've been here all day, you were right here at the start for your opening speech, then you've experienced the panels, the energy in this room. There are thousands of people watching online right now as well. What have you thought of it all?
Well, I forgot about the thousands online.
Sorry.
Do you know, firstly, thank you to DirtFish for having me here. I said it in my intro, but I'm so proud to be here. And what an amazing audience. This room has just been buzzing all day, and it's not just courtesy of the brilliant soundtrack that's been playing in the breaks that I was busted dancing to upstairs before.
Music has been brilliant. So
brilliant.
DJ, big up to the DJ.
But no, this is so inspiring. You know, I actually get to do quite a lot of public speaking now, which I love doing. But it's normally I turn up and I do my little bit on stage and then I go. I never get the chance to actually listen to other people talk. And to be able to listen to these brilliant women that I've had the pleasure of listening to today, to hear their experiences of being women in motorsport has been really eye-opening to me. But also we spent a lot of time together yesterday, and it's just been such a positive experience, and I will forever remember it when I leave here tomorrow.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. And you know, I noticed earlier, just before we got everything going, there was a queue of people, a literal queue, waiting to talk to Claire. We did abandon you at that point when we saw how popular you were outside, and but that's great that you've got to speak to everybody here as well, answer questions. That's a really lovely aspect of it.
I love that. The more people that want to come up and talk to me, the better. It's one of the greatest privileges that I still feel today. You know, people come up, and I went to go and do a baseball cap, and the lady said, "Oh, I've just so know your face. It's so weird now seeing you here." And you know, it never fails to surprise me, because I never think of myself in that way at all. I was just, you know, someone that ran a Formula One team. And some days, I mean, and most of the time, I still pinch myself that I even did that. It feels quite strange. So when people come up to me, I use the word privilege a lot about the time that I spent in motorsport, but I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And when I can talk to anyone, whether it be a fan who's watched the sport for 25 years, or whether it's a young woman that's looking to come into the sport, she might be studying STEM, she's 16, how can I get into sport? It is such an honor to try and give any small bit of advice to those young women coming in, or hearing stories about when someone watched the 1992 Hungarian Grand Prix when Nigel Mansell won the championship in a Williams. It's a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah, I'm sure. Talking about wonderful experiences, you know, when we think of family businesses, we think of butchers, maybe, you know, the vegetable shops. There's not many family-run businesses in Formula One. Williams was, and that's something very special, and you were a huge part of that. I really want to get a bit of an insight as to what it was like growing up as part of the Williams household, you know, surrounded by motorsport everywhere. I mean, were you drinking your tea out of Williams merchandise mugs in the morning, or was it not quite that?
Yeah, it wasn't quite like that. Again, it was a privilege growing up in the world that I grew up in, and I could probably talk for hours about this, but perhaps I can just give you first, before I talk about me actually when I was born growing up, but a bit of the Williams history, because some people might not actually know about that in the room, about where, you know, particularly if you're a new fan to Formula One, you might not know where Williams came from. But my dad, Frank, he started, his love of cars really started when he was a young boy at school. My dad came from very humble beginnings up in the north of England. He was born in 1942, so just in the middle of the war. And his father was a bomber pilot. And he left when my dad was about 3 months old. And so my grandmother raised my father by himself. But because they lived in this horrible part of Newcastle in the north of England, my grandmother realized that the only way for my father to make anything of himself was to give him the best education. But the only way that she could afford that was to take a job herself as a house mother in a school for disabled children, which meant she was, you know, away at this school for, you know, the whole year. So she sent my poor dad at the age of 5 to a boarding school in deepest, darkest Scotland, run by monks.
Run by monks?
Run by monks.
Okay.
And it must run in the family because he then sent me to an all-girl Catholic boarding school run by nuns. So, which is weird because he hated the school that he was sent to. And he was never taken home in the holidays because she was working. Yeah. So my poor dad, at the age of 5, was left in this monastery. And it was at that time, though, that he fell in love with cars because there was another father of a fellow pupil who worked as a used car salesman. And he used to come to the school on weekends that he could collect his child in just a complete different array of cars. None so beautiful as here, but those cars just captured my dad's imagination. And I suppose for him, it was the small bit of pleasure that he had at this quite horrific time of his life that I think left him traumatized. And from there, he fell in love with cars. And from, I think, about the age of 15, he started hitchhiking around the UK in order to go and watch motor races at Brands Hatch, at Donington, at all these amazing places. And he hitchhiked because he didn't have the money to pay for a bus ticket or a train fare. And then he couldn't actually afford the admission tickets to get in. So he would sleep rough overnight and then find holes in the catch fencing in order to crawl through at about 2 a.m. so the guards didn't find him. And then he would wait till the races started. It's quite an extraordinary story if you think about it. You know, my dad then went on to win 16 world championships, but he literally came from nothing. And you know, he started his career racing. So I'm really going on a bit, but I'm so proud of this story, and I tell it as much as I can.
Oh, it's a lovely story. No, please, we'd love to hear more.
But he started racing himself. He got in with some of the races in the paddocks. My father was a real charmer and great at networking. And so he managed to cobble together some money to get a car. So he started racing. Turned out he was a terrible racing driver. Apparently pretty quick, but never remembered where the brake pedal was. Left it too late. Would always spin off into the gravel traps. And so decided maybe I'll quit my racing career and become a constructor. And that's when he started Williams back in 1969. He started his first team, but it took him 10 years of hard struggle. Yeah. You know, bailiffs at the door. You know, I joke with my husband that I was born into a house with no carpets, no curtains, with the bailiffs banging on the door and us kids being pulled off behind the sofa so that no one knew we were in the house when they came to get all the furniture and the television. But that was the way it was. You know, my mother bankrolled the team in the 70s. If it wasn't for her money, Williams wouldn't exist today. And then my father met Patrick Head. And for those of you that don't know in the room, Patrick Head is one of the most gifted engineers that Formula One has ever seen. He actually designed that Metro 6R4 in the corner there as a winter project. And Patrick and my dad forged one of the greatest partnerships that I think motorsport really has ever seen. And when Patrick came on board, things for the team turned around completely. And Williams won their first race in 1979 at our home Grand Prix at Silverstone in the UK. And then the team went from strength to strength, dominating the sport in the 80s and the 90s. My dad won 16 world championships. Only 2 other teams have done that. Ferrari is the only team that has surpassed that, and won 114 Grand Prix. And for the majority of that time, my father did it as a quadriplegic, having broken his neck in a road car accident. And as you can probably imagine, you don't need to ask me who my role model was, because it was my dad.
It was your dad, absolutely.
What he achieved in this sport. He was the longest serving team principal that Formula One has ever seen, far surpassed Enzo Ferrari's record, and dedicated his whole life to Formula One and building the Williams racing team.
I mean, it's an incredible story, what you've told so far. But the fact that after that accident, the fact that he was in the wheelchair, but he came back to the role quite quickly as team principal. The resilience, the bounce back, the drive was quite incredible.
It was. I mean, he was told after his accident, he spent, I think, 3 months in intensive care, not just hospital intensive care. He died 3 times. Wow. My mother was told by the doctors, you may as well let him die. He's not going to make it. And she was like, he will, because he's Frank. You make sure he stays alive. And actually, it was my mum that resuscitated him twice because the doctors refused to keep doing it. She was the one that jumped on his chest and resuscitated him in the hospitals. But his resilience was extraordinary. And when you suffer a spinal cord injury like that, you are invariably put through a program of rehabilitation. I'm sure many people are aware of this. My father refused. My father said Formula One is my rehabilitation. He didn't go to a race for the whole of the 1986 season, but he was back at a Grand Prix in 1987. Not fighting fit, but Formula One was his medicine. He said once, Formula One is like oxygen. It fixes you. And for my dad, that was absolutely the case.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. But for you growing up in that environment, with motorsport all around you, and incredibly driven, well, both sets of parents, not just your dad, but your mum as well, what kind of effect did that have on you as a young Claire Williams?
Yeah, both of my parents. I talk about my dad a lot, but my mother was an extraordinary woman, incredibly resilient. Typical British stiff upper lip, dad's in a wheelchair, we just carry on with life, that kind of thing. And it was actually, to be fair, it was quite a normal house to grow up in. The odd racing driver would come round. When I say that, actually, most people don't have racing drivers come round today, so apologies.
No.
Yeah, they don't. I'm sorry. It was incredible. I remember Nigel Mansell one time coming round to the house, because my mum used to like to be involved in the driver choices, because I think she didn't quite trust my dad to make the right ones. And my dad actually always appreciated and sought her advice. And so I think in like the early 80s, mid 80s, Dad was looking at bringing in Nigel. And my mum loved Nigel Mansell. There was another driver on the table, not literally, but he was I think probably at the top of my dad's list, and my mum was not convinced by this driver. So she got Nigel to come round to the house, but she took these visits really seriously. Like the whole garden was re-landscaped when a racing driver came round, and Nigel, though, she'd put these incredible black, which were very rare at the time, black tulips in planters all around the house for Nigel's arrival. Little did she think through the fact that Nigel was arriving in a helicopter, and as the chopper came down, every single one of these purple-headed tulips blew apart, and she was absolutely livid. But it was amazing to grow up in those kinds of environments where you do have those racing drivers around you, and I never took it for granted. Yeah. One time I was at my dad, we talked about it in the car. He never took us to races. As much as my dad didn't leave his work at the office, it was always discussed. It was the only thing we ever talked about, really, in our household growing up. He never left it at work. We would never be taken to Grand Prix. Silverstone was the only race that we were allowed to go to. My dad's approach was, well, no one else has to take their family to work, so why the hell do I? Which I kind of got, but I think ticked my mother off quite a lot. And so Silverstone, she forced him to take us to. But one year, when I was about 14, my dad said, you can choose one race, Claire, to come to with me, just you and me. I was like, oh, wow, Dad's taking me to a Grand Prix. This is amazing. So I chose Hungary, thinking I would get to spend all this wonderful time with my dad. Didn't see him for the whole Grand Prix weekend. He handed me over to the poor race team manager, not like the man had anything better to do with his weekend than look after the boss's daughter. But I was staying in a room, interconnecting room with my dad in the hotel, and every night I would go and say goodnight to him about 9 o'clock. And I walked in the room, and he is there in his hotel room, and Ayrton Senna is in the room with him. And my dad and Ayrton had this incredible relationship, and they would always meet quite privately, away from the racetrack. I think they just had a little soft spot for each other, basically. And Ayrton, at that time in '92, was desperate to get into a Williams. And so they were obviously having a private conversation about potentially Ayrton taking a seat next year. And I'm there, and I've just barged in, and I've shouted, "Night, Dad!" And then I see Ayrton Senna. I am a 14-year-old girl, the daughter of a Formula One team principal. I don't like my girlhood crushes. They weren't boy bands, they were racing drivers. Ayrton Senna was my girlhood crush, and I walked into that hotel room in floral pink pajamas.
Nice!
I have never been more embarrassed in my life. But I get to tell that story, that Ayrton Senna saw me in my pink pajamas.
And I'm sure very pink cheeks from blushing after seeing that
exactly.
as well. What was it like? You mentioned, it was extraordinary growing up. And I think it's hard for us all to relate to the fact that you had racing drivers coming around to your house. And the only analogy I can think of to compare myself, My brother worked in a computer shop. Now, in the 80s, gaming was just coming into the fore. And when he worked there, he would bring home all these games. And all of a sudden, I was super popular in school. Everyone wanted to come to my house, play computer games all the time. So did you get that in school? Were people like, Claire, can I come round for tea? Could I possibly meet Nigel Mansell?
No one was interested.
What?
No one was interested at all. I went to an all-girls Catholic boarding school for secondary schools. There was very little interest from any of the girls. Although I say that, when I was at prep school, which was from the age of 7 till 11, it was mixed, but no one cared that I was Frank Williams' daughter, even though, at the time in England, Frank Williams was huge. But I used to get the bus to school, and we shared the bus, my school and then the senior boys' school. And strangely enough, all the boys, when I got on the bus, would go, Claire, come and sit on the back seat with us. So I used to say, well, this is great. 9-year-old little girl and all these 13-year-old boys asking me to go and sit on the back seat with them. And that was obviously a benefit of being Frank Williams' daughter.
There we go. When you were growing up, you're surrounded by motorsport. You just mentioned your dad didn't take you to many races, and we spoke in the car earlier, and he said he wasn't so keen for you to be involved in the team in any way. But were you pushing for that when you were a teenager, or was there something else in your mind that you wanted to do?
No. So my parents made it resolutely clear that neither myself nor my brothers, I have an older and a younger brother, would ever work at Williams. And therefore, there was no chance that either of us, any of us, would one day inherit the team. It was just made abundantly clear to us. Don't even think about the fact that one day your father will hand over the racing team. And to be fair, my dad never had a succession plan. I think he thought he would be there till the end, and that was it. No one else was going to play with his train set. He meant that. I think he'd rather smash it up than let anyone else play with that. That's what my mum used to say. So I didn't, when I was young, ever have any ideas in my head that I would one day run the team. Absolutely not. I didn't even think, when I left university, that I would go and work in the team, because again, that was made really clear to us that you need to go and forge your own way in this world. And I was very happy with that. I think probably because I'd grown up having been told that, I was very used to that idea, and I wanted to go off and do my own thing. But when I was young, and going back to that all-girls Catholic boarding school again, and the time that I was there, girls were raised to be wives and mothers, unless you had a particular vocation to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I certainly didn't have either of those. And so I just followed the education route to its natural conclusion, leaving university, having studied politics, and I didn't really have a plan. I did not know what I was going to do. So that should give heart to anyone out there, that is worried about if they're in education still. You don't have a clue. You never know what's going to be around the corner for you.
I think it's very true of so many people at that age. It's very difficult to know what you want to do in the future, and so much pressure is put on people to make a decision, and so many people make the wrong decision and then end up changing. For you, what was the catalyst that actually got you into motorsport and through the door of Silverstone?
Yeah. So I suppose my working life began a bit earlier. As much as my parents didn't want me to end up with a career in motorsport, or certainly at Williams, I'd always spent a lot of my school holidays working in the travel office. So helping, it was a lovely lady called Donna Robertson. She was our race team secretary, working for Dickie Stanford, our brilliant team manager. And they used to let me go in from the age of about 14. Every school holiday, I would go and work in the travel office, and I loved it. Book it helping. I say helping probably quite loosely. I probably made more balls up than they appreciated. I probably did more damage or more harm than good. But I loved it, and it was absolutely I loved being a part of Williams, being around the team. But then when I left university and not knowing what I wanted to do, my dad very kindly arranged for me to go and speak to the managing director of Silverstone. And as I was there and having this conversation with the wonderful Brian Pallett, he said, "Oh, it just so happens we've got a junior press officer role here." And I was like, oh, that's wonderful. And I didn't really think about it at the time, and I jumped on the chance, and that's how my career started. But in hindsight, I do wonder if my dad played a small part in, phoning old Brian up and going, would you mind giving my daughter a job because she doesn't know what to do with her life? He probably paid my salary as well, who knows? But Silverstone was a dream job for me. I never felt so lucky that finally I had found something, and it became very quickly apparent to me that I loved working at Silverstone. And it was only when I was made redundant after 3 years, because they went through ownership changes, that was the only reason I left. I'd probably still be working there now. It was just one of those places. I think Jess talks about teamland. I'd never heard it explained like that before, but it is like that when you are fortunate enough to work in a team environment, whether it's in motorsports or wherever it is. If you work in a great team in your business, it's that camaraderie you have. And I felt that at Silverstone, and I very much felt like I'd kind of found my tribe there.
That's really interesting to hear. And I think, again, it's relatable for everybody here to know that where you started, how you started, and to where you end up. That's a vast chasm of a difference, starting as press officer to then running the team. But there's a big bit in the middle, which we need to talk about. So how did you persuade your dad that you were going to come and work for the team?
Yes.
After all these years of, no, go your own path, steer your own ship.
Well,
How
I
did it
didn't
happen?
persuade him. So when I was made redundant from Silverstone, rather than sit at home and wait for a job to come my way, I went back to the race team office, travel office, and I worked in there till I found something else. But when I was working there, probably after about 2 or 3 months, Jim Wright, our head of marketing in the team, phoned down and said, Claire, my junior press officer has just walked out. Would you like the job? And I said, Jim, if you ask my dad, I don't think he's, going to agree to that. And Jim went, oh, no, I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And I said, well, look, go and phone my dad or go and speak to him and see what he says, because I'm not sure about this. And Jim phones me back 2 minutes later and went, yeah, your dad said absolutely no bloody way. I think he actually used a worse word than that. But Jim said, don't worry about it. I'll sort it. Give me a bit of time. Anyway, I think it took Jim Wright about 3 months to persuade my dad to give me a junior press officer job. But you know what? Quite right. My dad was very anti-nepotism. My older brother was already working in the team. And he didn't want to be seen. He was a great leader, and he was a great leader for a reason. He didn't want people to just think that he was handing his jobs out to his kids. And I got that. That's why I never hassled him for a job. And that's why, my first reaction was, if you ask my dad, because, I'm not sure that this is okay. But anyway, my dad finally did relinquish, and he offered me the job very reluctantly. He put me on the standard 3-month probation period was doubled to 6, and he thrashed me to within an inch of my life for the first 6 months, if not probably the first 6 years. But quite right, because it was important to Dad that he showed people that he wasn't just giving family members jobs, but it was more important, I think, to me. I was very conscious of the fact that I was the boss's daughter. I mean, that tag stuck with me my whole career. And I wanted to prove to people that I deserved it, that I belonged there. Because, thousands of people want these jobs. Thousands of people work their socks off for these jobs. It's not right that family members just are given them just because, your dad might be quite nice and you think it's good to give. It was really important to me that I worked so hard to prove that I deserved that job and I deserved to be there. And so also just to make my dad proud and to make sure that he felt he had done the right thing.
And I think it's really interesting because he strived and worked so hard for what he had achieved. And was that part of his thinking that, like you're saying, nepotism, he didn't want that. And he didn't want you maybe to get an easy ride either, because having to work for it builds your character, builds your strength, your resilience.
Yeah. Exactly, it so does. Whether my dad really thought about it to that degree, I'm not sure, because he was probably busy thinking about other stuff. But, as a family, we did have this wonderful upbringing, and I'm not sat here saying anything other than that, but my parents were tough parents. They did not make life wholly easy for us. My dad had a car accident, just carry on with it. deal with it type thing. You're going off to boarding school when my brother was sent when he was 7, deal with it. You're going when you're 12, deal with it. We were made very much to stand on our own 2 feet. When we were taken to the British Grand Prix, we were talking about, I was telling you in the car, it wasn't just a case we got to waft around the paddock. We were given jobs. We were put to work. My job was making the tea and doing the washing up. I must have made 10,000 cups of tea over a British Grand Prix weekend and washed up and made sandwiches. And if there were important people that came into the motorhome and it was busy, my brothers and I were sent to the merchandise areas. Go and get lost for 3 hours. You are seen and you are not heard. And I think that was what was important to my dad, and that was it was important to all of us. We weren't just given an easy ride.
No, and that's exactly what, like you're saying, it was the right thing to do, and it's built you into the woman you are today. You moved through successive jobs within Williams over the years. Tell me how that worked out, how you worked your way up the ladder.
See, I started in the comms team and I stayed there for a really long time, but I loved it. Like, if anyone works in comms or has any aspirations to work in communications, it's a brilliant department to work in. If I could still be a press officer holding the dictaphones for the drivers at races, I still would be. Yeah, what it was, though, was a brilliant showcase for the whole business. There are very few areas in a business where you actually get to that 360 view of a business, because you're the press officer, the head of comms, whatever it is. You are there with the C-suite, you're there with the senior execs, and you get a snapshot into that world as a consequence. As a press officer, I was organising the interviews for my dad or for the technical directors, the drivers. You get access to a level, and therefore a level of information that perhaps you wouldn't get, you don't get if you're a race engineer or whoever it might be. So it was a really good grounding, I suppose, a foundation for me, particularly when I moved up into head of communications and then head of investor relations and quickly into then running the whole marketing and commercial departments. It was a very good grounding. But it was a bit like Silverstone for me. I wasn't allowed to go to races probably for the first 2 years as a junior press officer. I didn't go to the races. I got to look at the clippings on a Monday morning.
Wow.
I was put through my paces. And then I got to go to a few races and then a few more. And then after, my 4th year, I was going to all of them as the press officer. And it was a great time. There was a brilliant group of people in marketing, and we worked our socks off. I wasn't one of those people that worked hard and play hard. I always went to bed early and kind of so I could function the next day. But it was a really joyous time, I think, in my career. As much as at the time there were definitely stressful moments, there were difficult drivers to deal with or crisis scenarios that I had to manage. It was a really easy, I suppose, time, definitely easy compared to what then was coming down the line at me in 2013.
You talk about dealing with the drivers and difficulties there. When you were a press officer there, and obviously we all know from experience, people who've dealt with drivers, they can be difficult, but were journalists trying to ask you questions as well, opinions on the team, or trying to get anything from you as well as the drivers?
When I was the press officer?
When you were a press officer, yeah. Were there any difficult questions thrown at you at all? No,
just
no one
difficult
dared.
Drivers. Yeah, no, they never did actually, because we were, in Formula One in the paddock, you have your spokespeople.
Yeah.
So and the journalists, they know that. They know who are the people that are allowed to talk to them and those that aren't, and those are the team principal, the technical director, and the racing drivers. So and that's very much set in stone and ring fenced. But as the press officer, you are there to make sure that what your people are saying toes the party line. Everyone has a comms guidelines. So before every Grand Prix, the press officer sits down with the drivers, the team principal, the technical director, and talks them through the issues at hand, so that there is a party line that is towed that you have to stick to. You don't really have your own opinions. Although it was, when I was team principal, I wrote the comms plan, because I'm such a control freak.
I was just wondering if there were any sneaky journalists who would try and get into the team via you to get any information, which sometimes we do see, but obviously you didn't experience that, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
They're very well behaved journalists.
Yeah,
in
that's
Formula
good.
One.
That's good.
Yeah.
You mentioned some difficult drivers to deal with. Do you want to share any more on that, Claire, or are we keeping tight-lipped on that one? Throw away the key.
This is the best bit.
These are the juicy bits.
Although I wish I could call the actual names out because it would just be payback. But no, I don't do that. But no, to be fair, on the whole, the majority of Formula One drivers are pretty well behaved.
Yeah.
Certainly these days, they're quite different. They're a very different breed now. They kind of much more well-mannered, well-behaved, and that's not just because there is this kind of corporate guideline they have to stick to, just because they know and understand that that is how you should behave. Whereas there is definitely this generation of drivers, and I don't want to stereotype or generalize, it was a handful of them, and so, there were a few that I encountered that were pretty badly behaved, and there were definitely times when I was a press officer that there was a couple of drivers that put me through my paces with some pretty deeply unpleasant scenarios. I mean, one scenario got so bad that our CEO had to actually give him a written warning.
Wow.
It was quite abusive and intolerable behaviour that I had to put up with. It was quite extraordinary considering I was the boss's daughter. Be like, dude, do you not know who my dad is? He's your boss. But it didn't make a blind bit of difference.
Talk to me about the sea change and becoming deputy team principal, which was a massive deal. It was all over the papers in the UK. It was headline news. But for you personally, that is your personal story. And as much as we can digest all of that online, on social media, talk about it, it was happening to you at the time. It was a decision that was made. How did you feel about the change?
Yeah, it was a really surreal time in my life. I was kind of minding my own business as director of marketing and commercial, and so I had a seat on the board. But effectively, I was pretty much running the business with Toto Wolff. Toto Wolff, for those of you who don't know, he runs Mercedes now, but his entrance into Formula One was actually via Williams. He bought a shareholding, small one, and that put him on our board as executive director. And because my dad had stepped away a bit, and because we had a CEO who wasn't really working out, Toto kind of stepped in a bit with the day-to-day running. And for some bizarre reason, I was at the table too. And so Toto and I, for the 2012 season, were pretty much kind of running. He was more running Williams than I was, but I was definitely his kind of sidekick number two. And then towards the end of 2012, Mercedes decided they wanted to enter Formula One. And they approached Toto to run their team. But Toto was like, well, I run Williams, so who's going to take over? And it was Bernie Ecclestone who was running the sport at the time, and Toto Wolff came up with this brilliant idea that maybe I should. It wasn't my dad. My dad was, but in effect, the last to know. We had a board at the time as well, because 25% of our business was listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, because we'd gone public. Worst decision we'd ever made. And Toto and Bernie approached me. They kind of really pulled the wool over my eyes. They pretended that they wanted to see me about a potential sponsorship idea, or like a sponsor that wanted to come in, dragged me to London, like on Christmas Eve when I was about to move house. And then there was this whole weirdness in Bernie's office where neither of them came in and left me in there for about an hour. And then they come in together, all like giggly, and go, would you like to run a Formula One team? And I'm like, I'm sorry, what are you talking about? I'm here to talk about a prospective sponsor. That's what I thought I was here for. And anyway, so that was presented to me. It was presented, Toto would like to go to Mercedes, but he won't go unless you take this opportunity. So I obviously gave it huge consideration over the winter. I spoke to my mother about it. I didn't speak to my dad about it because he wasn't in the loop. And just for a bit of background, my father developed Alzheimer's, which we kept private. We didn't go public with it. And at this stage, he was kind of in the throes of that. And hence kind of being one of the last to know. And so over that winter, I made the decision, do you know what? I've watched various CEOs over the past few years try and take the reins of this team and fail. At the time, we had come 9th, 8th and 9th in the Constructors' Championship. And I'd watched this failure and I thought, you know what, I can fix this. I know some of the stuff that we can do and to get easy wins to take Williams back to where we want it. So I'm going to give it a go. It was a really big decision for me because you can imagine trying to step into someone's shoes like my dad and the fact that he was my dad. And, you know, I was quite young at the time. I was 36. I was a woman. And it, you know, it was like, this is my dad's racing team. If I get this wrong, is just going to be horrific. But I felt that I could make some positive changes. And I always said, if I did get it spectacularly wrong, I would step away very quickly. So I made that decision to take over the team. But unfortunately, my mother was very ill at the time. She had terminal cancer. And we were going to announce the start of my tenure for the Australian Grand Prix in 2013, and then my mum passed away. So we had to delay it to the next race, which was in Malaysia. So at the time of stepping into the team principal role, I had literally just buried my mum, and my dad had Alzheimer's. And I was then having to take over this legacy team and deal with the consequent challenges. You talked about the headlines. Well, there were a lot of very negative headlines as well of me taking over the team. But it was like, you know, I've got a job to do, and I'm just going to focus on the job at hand.
And I think that's the only way you can go about it. How much advice did you take in making the decision? You mentioned talking to your mum about it. Were there other influences? And how many weeks did it take to actually, I'm going to say yes here?
It's quite blurry, the timeline. I mean, it was 13 years ago. I can barely remember what I had for breakfast. So it probably took a good 4 or 5 weeks to make a final decision. But there wasn't really an alternative. That was the problem. There was a vague alternative, but I was not going to let that alternative happen. So it was almost like, I've got to do this because I don't want plan B. So it was quite quick, but really the people that I spoke to was quite small. I spoke to Toto a lot. You know, it was a very confidential thing, what was about to happen. And I spoke to my mum, and that was probably about it.
Did it feel like a weight off your shoulders when you said yes? Was it something that was playing on your mind, the decision making, or like you said, there was no other option, so it was going to be the big yes? You said it, breathe out, let's go, let's make this successful again.
Yeah, exactly. I actually just wanted, once I'd made that decision, I wanted to get going. Because in Formula One, there is literally no time to waste.
Yeah.
Williams was not in good shape. We were heading into the start of a season, and this decision needed to be made, and I needed to get to work. And time was not on our side in order to do that. So it was like, we've just got to get going with this.
What was the feeling in the team with this decision? Because someone who's come in at an early age and been a press officer, and now you're going to be, it was a deputy team principal title, but de facto you were running the team. You were the boss. Yeah. What was the sensation? What were the feelings like in the team around you? How supportive were they? And were there any non-supporters?
If there were non-supporters, they didn't vocalise that to me.
Good.
I'm sure that there were. Do you know, it was a very big transition for the team. It was a big transition for me, but I think far more so for them, because at Williams, we had a very loyal team, and they worked there for Frank. You know, people came to work at Williams to race for Frank, and we had a lot of people in our team that had been at the team for 30, 40 years. And a lot of those people, equally, as a result, had known me since I was, 2, 3 years old. And suddenly they were being asked to work for me, race for me, roll their sleeves up and dig deep for me. And that was a big psychological mindset shift for a lot of people, I think, to wrap their heads around, we used to know this little girl, and now she is suddenly the boss. So I think that was quite hard. It was equally hard for me to step into that leadership position. I was very nervous about it, and having to, not boss people around, but lead people and try and get people to race for me and be that leader. Not that my dad was, because I had absolutely no desire to step into his shoes. You just don't step into someone's shoes like him. I wanted to be the kind of guardian, I suppose, of his team. But again, Formula One does move so fast. People were like, okay, Claire's in charge now. And I think people were happier with me being in charge, perhaps, than an outsider. They knew how much I loved that team. And I think they knew how much I would give it in order to turn things around.
What kind of leader would you say you were? We've used the word empathy quite a few times today, and having empathy, and you've seen the team from a very young age, you know everybody there, but it's really important to be a strong leader. So what kind of leader do you think you were?
So it's really difficult to answer this kind of question, because how do you know? You can't step out of yourself and see, and if you ask someone, what kind of leader do you think I was, they'll probably never tell you the truth. I would like to think that I was an empathetic leader. I think it's so important to be that. If you want your team to fight for you in an environment that is as harsh as Formula One, you've got to look after your people, and that was absolutely paramount to me, and it was something that I had learned from my dad. So I think I was quite assertive. I was a quick decision maker. You have to be in such a fast-paced world as Formula One. I micromanaged, but I didn't lean over my people. So I was very aware of my limitations. The first thing I did when I took over was bring in a CEO that could work alongside me running the team. I was a 36-year-old with no experience of running a business, and suddenly I had a business of 700 odd people. I'd never really seen a balance sheet, for goodness sake. So I knew my weaknesses, and I knew that I had to bring people in and surround myself with people that were better than me, that I could rely on, that I could fall back on. And I'm not an engineer by trade, so I was certainly not going to start micromanaging my engineering team. It was like, all I need to do is make sure that I have the best possible people that I can bring into this team to make this team shine. And that was my job as a leader.
I'm inspired by everything you're saying. It's really great to hear you chat. We are going to be throwing it out to questions soon, I promise. I know there's going to be lots. Talk to me a little bit more about the team then moving forward in the next generation, in the Claire Williams generation, because there was success, but there were challenges as well. It was a real split. Yeah. How did you deal with the years moving forward?
Yes, so when I took over the team, as I said earlier, we were not doing well. But I was... It was very clear to me what we needed to do. So that involved restructuring our technical department, bringing in some new strength in that area. We changed engine manufacturer from Renault to Mercedes. We brought in new drivers. We had Valtteri Bottas. We brought in the brilliant Felipe Massa to partner with him. And then we brought in the Martini title sponsorship to make us look all shiny and new again. And we came out into the 14 season, which was really my first big year of having effected all this change, and we just smashed it. It was absolutely awesome. Those two first years, I think we scored 15 podiums, which, and I'm going to say this because I feel like I'm in a safe environment, but I have scored more podiums than any other team principal in Formula One in the last 15 years outside of Christian Horner and Toto Wolff. And I say that because I'm a woman, and I have definitely felt during my time in Formula One that I'm not allowed to celebrate that. I'm allowed to celebrate the failures that I had during the end of my career. People don't remember the fact that I did take the team to two third places. And this is very uncomfortable for me because as humans, we don't like boasting about our achievements, but I'm learning to do it a bit because I think it's important, particularly in this environment when we're trying to celebrate women. The fact that I did take the team to 2/3 and I did take it to 2 P5s in the championships. But it is also important when you are a leader to talk about your failures. And there were definitely failures that I made. The buck stopped with me. And I was the leader of the team that then fell quite dramatically in the championship in 2018 to P10. And there were absolute reasons why that happened. Reasons that off the back of bad decisions that we made internally, but also there were external factors that contributed to that. The sport in that time was going crazy. You know, I had a budget of about 120 million sterling a year to go racing. Quite enough money, if you ask me, to send 2 race cars around a track on a Sunday afternoon. And yet, because the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull, these huge manufacturers that come into the sport, that were trying to, it was just the Toto Christian war, basically. They were trying to outspend each other. And so the costs just started escalating. They were spending $500 million each just to beat each other. But as a consequence, teams like mine suffered because we couldn't compete. And we then spiraled down the pecking order, and we spiraled very quickly. And so those last 2 years, 18, halfway through it, we realized that we were not in good shape. And then we knew going into the 2019 season that it was going to be a disastrous year, but we just had to get through it. But we made quite a lot of changes in that 18 season, and we felt that we were kind of on our way up. But unfortunately, when you fall that low, it takes a really long time to get yourself back up. But we knew that we had created the kind of pathways in order to achieve that. But unfortunately, in 2020, or the end of 2019, our title sponsor decided not to pay his bills. And when you lose 25 million out of your 120 budget, that is a massive hole to fill. We did. We filled that hole. Someone, an existing investor, well, he was a guy that we knew in our team. He actually plugged that gap. So I thought, thank God, we're okay. We can carry on racing. And we went to Australia in 2020, and COVID hit. And as we all know, COVID cost a lot of people dearly, and it cost me our racing team. Because when you don't go racing, you don't get paid. And we went to Australia. My husband and I flew to Australia, and within 24 hours we were flying back home from Australia. And we didn't go racing until July, I think, of that year. We missed 8 races, which, if you consider each race is probably worth about 10, 15 million in prize fund money, that's a big chunk of your budget that you just can't recover from. And therefore the for sale sign went up.
Before we talk about that, can we go back to the successes? Because I'm interested to know, when you were having the successes, the 15 podiums, did you celebrate them at the time? Because
yes.
You did. Okay, good.
We were sponsored by Martini. We celebrated.
Just because sometimes things are moving so fast in your world that it's like, okay, we move on to the next, and you don't sometimes live in the moment and appreciate what the team has achieved. And for a team like Williams, the morale boost, the camaraderie that must be there when you get success. I can imagine it's quite a big celebration, but it's brief and you move on.
You do, and you have to, because there actually isn't a huge amount of time to celebrate. And I hate admitting it, but towards the end of those few really great big early years, Fauti or whoever it was would get a podium, and because we always found ourselves further away, our garage quite far away from the podium, I'd be like, oh really, do I got to walk all the way down to the podium again? And my phone would light up with congratulatory messages because I'm so polite. I would have to reply to all of them. I'd be like, oh Jesus, can you just leave me alone? So the one lesson I learned from that was never ever fail to celebrate your success, because you never know when that success is going to leave, and success can be incredibly fleeting. So enjoy every moment of it. But what it also taught me is when you're actually not doing well, you can still find success in those moments. And you talked about motivation of our team. And when we weren't doing so well in that 2018, 2019, we actually had one of the most motivated race teams in the paddock because, and there were a number of reasons for that, but one of the greatest reasons was because we still celebrated our small successes. If the guys did a sub 2-second pit stop, we celebrated. I remember celebrating so hard one weekend, I can't remember the reason why, but we drank the bar dry, and other teams were walking past on a Saturday night, and we're partying at the top of our motorhome. And there are people walking past going, what the hell are Williams celebrating? And it was like, you've got to celebrate the small wins, because when your team, whoever you are, when you are having a hard time, when things aren't going well, you can't keep thrashing everybody to keep, you think you're going to keep working them to that level and expect results. You've got to take a moment to celebrate the small wins, because it's in those moments that you build confidence and you build morale and you build the enthusiasm, the encouragement to get those people to keep fighting, to keep getting the next small win and the next small win.
Can I ask you a cheeky question about Valtteri Bottas? Would he have got away with his mullet in the Williams team?
I talk about Valtteri quite a lot now. I mean, Valtteri Bottas is one of my favourite drivers that I was lucky enough to have driving for us. The Valtteri that I knew is not the Valtteri that we all see today. I mean, some of the stuff that I see online, I'm like, what? It's crazy. And it's like, was that Valtteri in my Valtteri? Because I don't know, I'm almost quite pleased that it wasn't, because I don't know what I would have done. But I know what my dad would have done. He would have got out his wheelchair and walked Valtteri down to the barber shop himself. Because my dad was a stickler for, that kind of thing. But you know what? What I think is great to see is that these drivers suddenly are having their personalities. They're coming out and they are being who they want to be, and we can celebrate that. That's who Valtteri is. And that is a wonderful thing. 20 years ago in Formula One, that would never, ever have been allowed. But they're people, and they have personalities, and they should get to showcase them.
We all want to see them. We love the characters behind the drivers, and that's the most relatable factor, because, there's a handful of people in the world that can do what they can do behind the wheel. But when you discover that they have amazing personalities, they're funny, it's the whole Drive to Survive phenomenon, really, that showed off people and their characters, and so many fans were picked up because of that.
Yeah. And they have, I know there are racing drivers in the room, but these guys, what they put themselves through to be the best of the best, a lot of people don't see that effort, that work. I mean, it is quite extraordinary. So they deserve to have a bit of fun when they want to. And do you know what? It's brave. Yeah, because I'm sure Valtteri gets a lot of abuse for that. I'm sure he does. Yet he does it anyway. And I think that is a brilliant, brilliant example of someone that I've read this book by Mel Robbins recently, Let Them, and I love that. And I think Valtteri must have read it too, because he's just getting on with his life and being who he wants to be. And I think we can all learn from that.
Yeah, I think we can all learn. Yeah, absolutely. We can all learn from that. Let's talk about the for sale sign. I know. That was obviously a big decision to make, a hard decision to make, a needed decision to make. There's a crossroads, you've got to take a path. How tough was it?
It was probably one of the worst things that I've ever had to do, particularly as I'd probably spent the past 3 years when journalists would ask me if the for sale sign is outside. I was so rude to them. And then I had to confirm it. It was really hard, but we were in such a maelstrom, really, of events in 2020. Now, I was trying to work out with, F1, the FIA, we're all trying to work out what on earth was going on. Nobody knew what this COVID thing was, the impact of it. How are we going to keep our businesses running? So, at the time, there was so much that I was having to deal with, keeping, the organisation going, I suppose. And when that wasn't, it became quickly apparent that wasn't going to happen, I was still having to run the team while selling it, or making that decision. And what the hardest thing was, actually, when I had to do that, I couldn't do what I'd normally done when it came to communications with my team. And I was always very transparent and open and honest about where we were as a team, what our plans were, where we were going. But I wasn't able to do that in person. I wasn't able to stand up like I would in a room like this and tell the team in person that I'm really sorry, but we've let you down, we failed, we've got to go, we've got to sell. I had to do it on Zoom, and with, there were 1,000 people at the time, and I didn't see one of their faces because you can't have 1,000 people on a screen. I had to do it to a blank screen, and it was really brutal. But then I had to, while in the sales process, because I was the team owner effectively, I had to be the one to sell my team. I had to pitch my team to prospective buyers while we were going around the world racing with COVID. So I would be there, doing my bit in the day at the racetrack, doing a 12, 13 hour stint. And then I would have 3 Zoom calls with prospective buyers at the end of the day that I'd have to go to my hotel room, have a quick change, put on my business suit, and then spend 6 hours selling my racing team. And all the while knowing that it was the worst thing in the world and I didn't want to do it. But it felt like a dream, really, while I was going through it. Because when you're having to do that and there was a time pressure for it, there absolutely was a deadline, we had to get this done, you just have to get it done. And that's what I had to do. I had to find the best buyer for my team in what was, nobody was buying racing teams in 2020 during COVID. It wasn't like Formula One is today, where everyone would like to buy a racing team and spend $1 billion for the privilege of buying one.
Yeah.
Buyers were not there. And it was really difficult to do that during that time. But that was my priority. It was keeping the lights on in the team, not letting anybody be made redundant, keep racing, find a great buyer that is going to respect our legacy and respect everybody in this team and want to take it to where I was trying to get it to.
Yeah, you did that. It sold. Claire Williams becomes a free agent, effectively. But this whole legacy, it's been your life. It's like a relationship ending. What were the first weeks, months like after that, Claire? Did you have to try and find yourself, discover what you wanted to do next? Who you were without it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole last 5 years have been about that. I'm still not quite there yet. The first 2 years, actually, I think when you've gone through something like that, it takes you a really long time to process exactly what has just happened. And that took me a while. But my dad, at the time, he was actually quite sick. And he was living at Williams because that's where he lived. So I had to relocate him. We actually bought him a house right next to mine. So he lived next door to my family and me for the last 2 years of his life. And because we were still in COVID, and my dad was a very vulnerable person at that time, and he had a care team of 11 nurses, I was effectively looking after my dad and managing his care team until he died. So that kind of kept my mind busy. And then my dad died, and my whole world felt like it was over. Despite the fact that I have a wonderful husband and we have children. But my life had been my dad and Williams for 45 years of my life. And I lived and breathed it, and it was in me. And it was very difficult to make that transition or to accept that it had gone. It was like a grief. I'm very open about it. I went into therapy in order to just try and get rid of that grief. Because these people, this race team, it was my home. I drove to the factory and it was home. These people were my family, and yet I didn't get to see them. From leaving Monza on Sunday night in 2020, I never saw them again. And yet I cared about these people deeply. So it was a very difficult grief, I suppose, to get over. Probably one that I never will. I miss it to this day. But, that's life. Life changes. Things don't stay the same, and it's your reaction to them that matters and that's important. You give yourself time and space to kind of create a new you. And I have a wonderful life. As I said, I get the time now to be a better wife, a better mother, which I never would have had the opportunity to do. And I get to do brilliant things like this. I get to still talk about my team, my parents, what their legacy was and what they achieved in this incredible world of Formula One.
And I think that's the perfect time to throw it out to questions from our beautiful audience. There's already hands everywhere. Where is Sandra? There she is. Microphone is on its way.
So a long time ago when I was younger, I was told by a manager to not cry when I was at work, that in business you're not supposed to cry. And oftentimes we see Toto or Christian losing their temper, or race car drivers losing their temper. And I'm wondering, when you were team principal, if you felt as a female you had to have more emotional control in order to have the respect from the other Formula One folks.
That's a great question.
That's such a good question. I'm quite emotional. I cry, adverts on telly, for goodness sake. So it was quite hard sometimes to keep my emotions in check. But I don't think it necessarily came down to the fact that I was male or female when it came to my emotions. If we had a bad race, if I was cross with a decision an engineer had made, or the driver had done something and I was angry, or I was just really upset, or whatever it was, I never really wanted to show too much emotion because I didn't think that it was appropriate. As a leader, you're the one everyone looks to. So if you break down, if you slam your headphones on the desk, you're not, I'm not referring to Toto. I've done it, but I do it in my office where no one can see except Mark. So I felt that I had to exert an element of control. I was a leader, people were looking to me. I did it once, and it was probably one of the biggest mistakes I made. We had a race. I felt, and I think pretty much the rest of the world felt, that our pit wall had made a really bad decision. And I was so angry. And at the end of the race, I walked over to the pit wall and I shouted at them. But then I went back to my office, I threw my headphones in the privacy of my own room, and then I thought about it. I thought, do you know what? These guys, they didn't make a decision intentionally for us to balls up that race. They did the best job that they could with the information that they had at hand. They didn't do anything intentionally wrong, yet I just went and thrashed them. Their boss, their leader, who, they're supposed to, I'm asking them to respect me, and, I should be appreciating the effort that they're putting in for this team, and I just went and humiliated them in front of the rest of the team. It was one of the lowest points of my time, and I think I learned a lesson there in control, and that leaders sometimes have to bury their emotions and have those private moments behind closed doors, because it is so important to show a level of calm. I'm not saying that you should be devoid of emotion. I'm just saying that I think you need to be calm as a leader, because everyone is looking to you. But I know that we're all humans and we all want to throw things around every so often. But I think there's definitely a time and a place. Certainly there was for me.
Okay, I saw way more hands. Okay. Sandra's on her way.
I don't know that I was that ready yet. I guess for any sort of aspiring team owners in any motorsport avenue, do you have any advice, anything that sticks out to you to give?
I think that you should always chase your dreams. Life is short. You've got to give it your all. Take the opportunities when they arise, and when they do and you're there, appreciate them, and literally, bleed it dry for everything that you can, and enjoy the moment. And give it your all. You're not always going to be successful, but learn from your mistakes. We all make mistakes, fail fast, get up, fight another day. But I think certainly one of the best bits of advice that I was ever given as a leader, and it was quite difficult for me to step into that leadership role and to be that boss. My CEO said to me, I think after about 6 months of watching me pussyfoot around the place and being like, oh, would you mind doing this? He just took me to one side and said, Claire, for goodness sake, will you please stop asking for permission and ask for forgiveness? And it was the best bit of advice, because it meant that it kind of gave me permission to be the boss that I needed to be for my team. But I needed somebody to kind of slap me around the face a bit and tell me that that was okay to be that person. So if that's what you're looking to do, make sure you stand tall, hold your head up high, and know that you're the boss.
I know people in the front here, it will come to you. There are still some people in the back.
Hey there. Okay, so we work in an industry where the definition of success is often based on wins, right? How has your idea of success evolved throughout your career, and what intangible metrics do you consider when determining that?
One of my greatest metrics for success are my team happy? We had success, we have failures, and as I think I said earlier, one of the greatest things for me was seeing how much my team worked in that 2019 season, when they knew that every race they were turning up at we were going to go out of qualifying in Q1. They knew we weren't going to score points, that we were going to be racing around at the back. Yet those guys and girls turned up to each one of those 22 races around the world, pretty much having flown economy as well and being asked to work 20-hour days. They turned up and they fought like they were fighting for podiums, like they were fighting for race wins. And I think that shows that they were happy. But they were happy because we put in the work back at base to make sure that they were happy. And we did that through a massive cultural transformation program we did, because we knew back in about 2017 that they weren't happy. And I think it's really important, again, as a leader, that you health check your organization. You ask people, how's it going for you here? Do you like working here? Is it crap? Is it good? Do we give you everything you need to do your job that we're asking you to do to the best of your abilities? So I think, that for me was the great, or the most important thing, being a leader, was, are my team happy? Because if they're happy, they're going to work really hard. High-performing teams are happy teams. You don't get people that are miserable in the workplace that are going to perform at their best. Why would they if they're miserable? So for me, that was, I've forgotten the actual start of the question, I'm sorry, but that was the most important element, and that's where the success came from for me, was making sure that we had that really strong culture underpinning our performance.
Okay, where were the other hands? Hands back up.
Hi, I just want to thank you for being here today. You were part of my Sundays for years, my Sunday morning routine, and it's crazy to be here, and I think for a lot of us it's a little surreal to see you here. I've always found your story really compelling, and for me personally, I find it so interesting because you are at this nexus of being from a motorsport family, but also your family was so anti-nepotism. And for myself, and I think a lot of people in the room, we don't come from motorsport families, and we kind of are doing this by ourselves. I taught my dad how to rallycross, so kind of backwards. So I was just hoping that maybe you had some insights that those of us who are not from a motorsport family, maybe we're not privy to some certain information that those of you who are from motorsport families get at a younger age. Do you have anything that you think would be really useful for us to know, or any kind of advice to kind of bridge that gap?
I know you've heard from a few people, I think, in the panels that have started their careers courtesy of falling in love with their sport because their families, their other family members have been in it, and of course, I'm of that ilk as well. But there are thousands of people in motorsport that haven't had a connection, and they have got into the sport through sheer hard work. And that's all I can say. I'm never going to sugarcoat it. I know a lot of people have come up to me today and asking me, how do you get into motorsport? It is hard. I never thought I would get into it, but when I did, I had to work my socks off, and I worked my socks off till the day I hung up my boots in 2020. I never stopped. It is relentless. And that relentless pursuit is something that you've got to apply if you want to work in motorsport at any level, in any of the championships. Motorsport is hard. It's a really hard and harsh environment to work in. Even when you're doing well, it is brutal. You can't dress that up. It's not an easy place to work in, yet the rewards are so wonderful. But for those wanting to start their careers, I think experience is incredibly important. I think a lot of people go, I want to work in Formula One, and that's immediately where they focus and where they aim. Don't do it. There are thousands now, even more so with Drive to Survive, but there are thousands of people queuing up for jobs. Go and try and get jobs in the junior formulas in Europe, or you've got brilliant motorsport here to go and get experience in that all applies to Formula One. Go and get that experience. Go and take the degrees or the education programs that you need to. Have that on your CV and build your network. Go to races. I can't remember, one of the panelists mentioned it earlier, but networking is so important. These kinds of events, you can go, there are so many in Formula One, in motorsport as a whole. There are lots of these events that, with panelists like me from the world of whatever motorsport it is you're interested in, that attend. Go to those events and network. Get your name out there. Get your face seen. Go on all the social platforms so that people know. So you're as prepared as possible for when those opportunities arise. But it's not you send your CV in and it's as easy as that. I don't think any of us have had an easy ride like that. We've all had to fight for our jobs in Formula One or wherever we are. It's not easy, but it's absolutely worth it when you do get there. But I can't give you any more advice than just to roll your sleeves up and be prepared for some hard work to get to where you want to get to.
Work, and more work. But it is, as you say, extremely rewarding. Extremely rewarding. There were more hands. Where are the hands?
Thank you for being here. It's actually really exciting to have you here and feel this connection to this world of motorsports that for us is usually just on television. So it's pretty thrilling. My question is, how is it bittersweet for you to see Williams now on the uptrend? And how jealous of you of James Vowles that he gets to work with Carlos Sainz?
What was the question?
What was the second bit?
I said, how jealous of you, or how jealous are you of James Vowles that he gets to work with Carlos Sainz?
That bit doesn't bother me. I'm very jealous of James Vowles that he's got my job. I don't like that. Do you know, I used to get, I didn't watch the races for a really long time. But whenever I would quietly ask Mark or whoever it would be, how did Williams do? And they say, oh, DNF or whatever, like, yes. And I know that's really mean, but I'll be really honest about it because, you know, I got a lot of abuse. And I'm so pleased that the FIA now have an actual person dedicated to this because the abuse that I received actually throughout my career, but the latter years that I got was horrific. For bringing the team to its knees or whatever. And, you know, yes, I was the boss, you know, I would hold my hands up. But it wasn't all my doing. But I was absolutely the target for the abuse, and that is absolutely fine. But when I left, I was actually, and I'm sure this is probably quite normal, but I was quite pleased that it took Williams quite a long time to get back on their feet because it demonstrated, I think, how hard it is. I didn't have the money. You know, I didn't have money to go racing really at the end of the day. So my hands were really tied. And yet I sold the business to a company that had, you know, a blank checkbook, and yet they still couldn't get it right. And I think I felt vindication when the results still weren't coming in. But now, 5 years later, I'm like, all right, you can do all right now. I'm all right with that. 5 years? You're okay. You can do fine. I had conversations with Carlos to join the team. I don't know when it was, back in maybe 16, something like that. And we didn't get it over the line for whatever reason. I don't remember. I never felt like that about racing drivers. I could be their mum. It would be really weird. I'm not jealous. I would only be jealous about it. And that's actually what you're asking me with rather than like anything else. Carlos Sainz is a brilliant driver. And I think him and Williams will be a great partnership. I think there's teething problems, but I think they will end up being a really great partnership. But, you know, the culture at Ferrari to Williams is very different. And you see it now with Lewis having been at Mercedes, and it's not quite working out as we might have all hoped at Ferrari. It's because Ferrari is a very different team. And, you know, you don't just move teams and you slot in and immediately it's great just because you're a great driver. It takes time for these things to kind of gel. But I think James has got a great lineup on his hands.
We have room for 2 more questions only. So
I've got the mic.
There you go. Straight in. Go.
So once you had acquired the team or taken over the team, did your dad ever gain any lucidity? And what did he think of you running the team, even though he kind of fought hard to not have you go into the business?
So did my dad, is the question, how did my dad think about me running the team? What did he think about it? Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. We had quite an interesting few first years because I had to kind of operate so that he felt that he was still running the team in order to, I'm sure those of you that have had experience of people with Alzheimer's or dementia, there is lucidity in moments and not in others. And so there were moments when my dad felt that he was running the team, and yet I was. And there are moments when he absolutely wasn't, but still felt it was a bit of a nightmare those first 4 years. But But for me, it was really important I protected his dignity. So I would be running the team, front and center, but then if my dad ever felt that if he was at a race and people would be like, oh, whatever, team's going well, it would be like, my dad's running the team, that's fine. He'd never really grasped, I don't think, the concept in those early years that I was running it, probably because I made out that he was still. It was very difficult, and I'm sorry I'm not explaining it very well, but it was quite a weird setup. But in the latter years, in the last 3 years, I think it became really clear to him that I was running the team. And he would always say that he was really proud of me, but he was never really say, I think you're doing a great job, or anything like that. If he did, he referred to me as the press officer and said I was great in communications. So it's like, thanks, Dad, that's really great. But I'll take that. I knew my dad was proud of me, and I knew that I think deep down, he knew that I was running the team. I just don't think his pride would ever allow him to admit it or to be okay. I think he was okay with it in the end. I think he was fine with me running it.
One more question. Sandra, it's all on you.
Hi, Claire. It's an honor to have you here in the Northwest. I think I'm speaking on behalf of everyone in the room of how much of a pleasure it's been having you here. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the team when Ayrton was with you. And unfortunately, of course, there was the fatal crash that took his life. And during that time period, I think F1 went through a bit of a change. And I was hoping you could maybe talk about within the team how your dad manage that, as well as, being in a difficult time with your team and making sure everyone is in an okay place. I know during the 90s, it was obviously a very different culture and how we respond to things like a fatality. And if that was a time that the team kind of bonded together over that.
You said Ayrton, didn't you?
Yes,
yeah,
Ayrton
okay.
Senna.
Yes, I wasn't working in the team when Ayrton died. I was 16 at the time. I remember it happening distinctly. My dad was in Imola, and we were watching it as a family at home, and then suddenly the crash happened. And immediately my mum came up to my room and said, pack your bag, you're going back to school. And I was put on a train and I went back to school, same for my brother, and we didn't see Mum and Dad for quite a long time. My dad, as I mentioned earlier, was really close with Ayrton, and it broke him, what happened, as you could probably imagine. And subsequently, because of, Ayrton died on an Italian racetrack. By Italian law, there has to be culpability. And so my dad, Patrick, Adrian Newey, they were charged with manslaughter, which made the whole thing even more unbearable. But how Williams as a team and how my dad responded to that was something I have never seen anything like it. I mean, I can't imagine, but having been a TP myself, I would go to every race praying to God that nothing bad happened to my drivers, and yet my dad had it happen to him twice. I can't imagine what it must be like, because you form a bond with your drivers, and they're in your race car. My dad didn't design any of his race cars, but they were his race cars, and 2 guys were killed in his cars. And he would never get over those, but he never talked about them. I remember we watched an interview recently with my dad, and the journalist asked him what it was like, or how he felt, and my dad just looks at the camera and he goes, far from well. And my dad was a man of few words, but I think that really sums it up. But what the team won the World Constructors' Championship that year. And I think that probably tells you the resilience and the courage that every single person within Williams had in order to get beyond that moment. And they raced the rest of the year in Ayrton's memory. We fielded 1 car in the ensuing Grand Prix. And I think that shadow remained with the team for many, many years. There were some wonderful safety changes that happened. The FIA changed the sport off the back of that, and it changed the sport, and it saved many other drivers' lives. The safety, the technologies that were built into the sport as a consequence. But I think it really demonstrated how people can come together in times of absolute crisis, like what happened. And it wasn't just Ayrton's life that was lost that weekend. Roland Ratzenberger, another driver, died the day before. It was one of the worst weekends in Formula One memory. It was horrific. But people have extraordinary resilience, and I think the whole paddock had extraordinary resilience to go racing the next weekend and continue, because when there are accidents, it's pretty brutal, and particularly for these drivers who then have to get back in those race cars. I don't know how they do it. It is extraordinary, and it demonstrates just how brilliant I think the human mind can be.
I'm completely in agreement with you there. What an amazing talk from Claire Williams, everyone, please. It's been inspirational, Claire. Thank you so much for your time, sharing your story. I'm sure we could go on for hours, to be honest, but we've run out of time now. So once more, ladies and gentlemen, Claire Williams.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. Thank you, Bex. That was amazing.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.